Welcome to the Gravity Well podcast with me, Jenny Yeremy. I host the Gravity Well to celebrate and share the stories of people looking to empower others with the knowledge and skills required to reestablish stability in our communities. My mission is to work through heavy issues in conversation and process in order to lighten the load. I acknowledge that I live on the traditional territories of Treaty 7 and Métis Districts 5 and 6. The treaties and self-governance agreements established by Indigenous peoples were created to honor the laws of the land, maintain balance with nature, and give back to uphold reciprocal relationships. This knowledge and intention are what guide the Gravity Well conversations. I ask for genuine dialogue, real hearts, and openness to different perspectives. This is your invitation to find common ground with me. Positions taken by participants, either individually or collectively, do not necessarily represent those of the Gravity Well. This podcast is dedicated to the natural world, our children, nieces, nephews, grandchildren, and all future generations. The Gravity Well is on YouTube and streaming wherever you get your podcasts. If you like what you see and hear, remember to like and subscribe. Good afternoon, everyone. Today's interview is very meaningful to me. I've mentioned on several occasions now that I worked as a geophysicist and liability expert in the oil and gas industry in Alberta for over 20 years. I worked in the office next to the individual who is credited with the birth of the Pathways Alliance. So the Pathways Alliance is a project intended to offer mitigation for CO2 emissions to justify future fossil fuel development in Canada. It's the biggest project of its kind in terms of concept and justifies things like LNG and oil sands development plans. So on that note, I am thrilled to be having a discussion with Professor Mark Jacobson today of Stanford University. Welcome to the stage, Mark.
Hi, Jenny. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thank you so much. As I was saying off stage, I have to go through an extensive introduction of Mark, so bear with me, Mark, as I do. So Mark Jacobson has been a professor at Stanford University since 1994. His research has crossed two fields, atmospheric science and energy. Mark's career has focused on better understanding air pollution and climate problems and developing large-scale, clean, renewable energy solutions to them. He's developed and applied three-dimensional models for atmosphere, biosphere, and ocean computer modeling, and has used those simulations to understand air pollution, weather, climate, and renewable energy systems. He's developed roadmap maps to transitions in countries, states, and cities towards 100% clean renewable energy. Mark has also published 191 peer-reviewed journals and articles. He's given over 800 talks. He founded and has directed the atmospheric energy program at Stanford. He's published 7 books. 4 of those are related to atmospheric work, and the last 3 are related to his energy work. And based on all of this, Mark is ranked as number 6 in terms of publications since 1980. Wow. Thank you so much, Mark, for taking the time to be with me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, so if you don't mind, actually, I didn't mention off stage, but I'd love to hear a little bit of what brought you into this work. Like, do you, what's been your journey to this? A lot of people will say, it's just a love of nature or whatever. What brought you into the climate field? Can you say?
Well, when I was a kid, when I was playing tennis, I traveled to Los Angeles and San Diego, and especially in San Diego, the air pollution was so bad. I thought, why should people live like this? And so I wanted to solve that problem ever since then. And I focused my studies and my research on doing that. So for the last 36 years as a scientist, I've been trying to understand and solve large-scale air pollution, climate problems through clean renewable energy. So part of my work has been to understand the problems. That's where computer model development came in. And then overlapping the last 25 years now, I've been trying to solve the problems. So when you're looking at solutions, I first looked at carbon capture back in 2008, and nothing's really changed since then, except it's been implemented. The policies trying to implement it have been expanded a bit, but no actual benefit, because as I'll talk about, carbon capture only increases carbon dioxide. It should be called carbon release, not carbon capture.
No kidding. Yeah, I was saying to you, I also have had exposure since that time about actually. I worked 2 fields in Canada that were doing what we called CO2 flooding at the time. So that's what we would call carbon capture utilization and storage, I suppose. But we would see breakthrough, what we would call breakthrough from one well to another instantly, almost within a week. So, to me, the idea of capturing this carbon and sequestering it long term is not a practical solution. Rather, the site cleanup and storage or cleanup and closure of sites would do both things. Well, actually, 3 things, as you were mentioning, with the water system, the land system, and the air pollution all in one. So, anyway, that's my how I came into this work as well, Mark. But yeah, let's start with why are we talking about carbon capture and storage? So, if you can just remind people, what was the intention of this technology to do in terms of justifying new fossil fuel development, let's say?
Well, the justification was that, well, really it's fossil fuel companies wanted to keep their fuels moving, being sold.
Mhm.
And because of all the policies that were being put in place, they had to come up with a way to keep doing that. And also pretend as if to keep selling fossil fuels, but then pretend as if they're actually helping to solve the problem. So they came up with this idea of carbon capture, where you add equipment to, let's say, a coal plant, to where the carbon dioxide emitted from the coal plant gets absorbed and then basically captured as a gas. And then that CO2 is compressed and put in a pipeline and then piped somewhere. In theory, they were saying most of it would be piped for storage and be put underground and stored forever. In reality, 82% of all the carbon captured worldwide to date has been used to just drill for more oil through what's called enhanced oil recovery, where the carbon dioxide is piped to a nearby oil field. The CO2 is then mixed with the oil, so it bonds with the oil, makes the oil less dense, so more of it floats to the surface faster. And for every ton of carbon dioxide, you get a couple more barrels of oil. And so even if just that process alone, by the way, 30 to 40% of the CO2 captured during this enhanced oil recovery process is released right back to the air during the enhanced oil recovery process.
Mhm.
And then the additional barrels of oil you get, depending on whether they replace existing oil or their new oil, there's 20 to 80% more of the CO2 gets released to the air by burning this oil. So you end up with 50 to 130% of the CO2 captured just going back to the air just from enhanced oil recovery, which again, 82% of all the CO2, that's what happens to it. So right there, you have no benefit, and that's not even the worst part of it, which we'll probably talk about later. So I'm just saying right off the get-go, it's a useless technology that is only designed to keep the fossil fuel industry going. There's no benefit whatsoever to humankind.
Right. Thank you so much. Yeah. So we would call that tertiary production. That's what we refer to it in the industry, is when you can do just regular primary production, and then you can do water flood production, which is what we'd call secondary enhanced, and then enhanced, being the third, that's CO2 injection, whether you're doing natural gas flooding or CO2 flooding or, that's basically the 2 that I've been involved in. But, yeah, and like I said, in all of those cases, you're right. I've only been involved in where we're using it to produce more production. We're not actually using it to store it and be able to know that that's being stored long term. And the other thing, if we can, since we have a little time, I want to talk a bit about the impacts of CO2 and other, let's call it contaminants in the natural gas system, which causes like actual risks to pipelines, et cetera, from erosion, and there needs to be, corrosion, I should be saying, in those pipelines based on these additives, if you will.
Well, with the carbon capture, the thing is they add a whole set of new pipelines. And for example, there's a proposal to add carbon capture equipment to ethanol refineries in the upper Midwest in the US to a few dozen ethanol refineries. And then once they capture that CO2, what do they do with it? Well, they were going to build like 2,500 miles of pipelines, CO2 pipelines, just to carry the CO2 to somewhere in North Dakota. And first of all, aside from the fact that you've got to build these pipelines, you got to invade people's land to put the pipelines in, and farmers don't want pipelines in. And so but it's like an invasive thing. They have to go through hundreds to thousands of individual homeowners and landowners to try to get them to agree to put a pipeline in. If they don't want to agree, then they're trying to get a forced court order to do this. So it's really an invasive process too, and it's just crisscrossing, this pretty landscape with these pipelines. And then you need more energy. So the main problem with carbon capture, aside from the fact that most of it's used for enhanced oil recovery, which is just ridiculous in the first place, is that it increases CO2 and air pollution and fossil mining and fossil infrastructure, and worsens people's health and increases cost of energy for everybody. So you might ask, well, how does capturing carbon increase carbon dioxide? Well, it's really simple. You need energy to run capture equipment and to run the CO2 through pipelines and compress it. And it's so much energy, it's about 25% of the energy of a coal plant is needed to add carbon capture to a coal plant. So that means if you add carbon capture to a coal plant, you need 25% more coal. And when you have 25% more coal, you burn 25% more coal, and you have 25% more air pollution. So right away, you have more air pollution, and you have more mining of coal, and the cost of this equipment is high, and it's going to be passed on to customers. So, for example, there was only one coal plant in the U.S. where carbon capture was added, and that was in Thompson, Texas, called the Petronova project. And that cost $1 billion for the carbon capture equipment. And what did they do to provide the energy for the capture equipment for the coal plant? They built a gas plant to run the capture equipment for the coal plant. And so you have to imagine how ridiculous this is. So they not only built a gas plant next door to the coal plant, then they have to build pipelines to pipe the gas. They have to mine the gas, so there's leaks of methane. They're burning gas while they're to produce electricity for running the capture equipment. None of that CO2 is captured, by the way, just it's released to the air. None of the methane is captured. None of the coal mining emissions are captured, including leaked methane, including the combustion emissions. So you have all this pollution continuing, and you have more pollution now because you're burning gas now and mining the gas. And you have the CO2 that's being emitted, and plus the methane equivalent of CO2 that's being emitted is right there virtually the same as the CO2 that's captured. So you're really doing nothing. In fact, some people say, well, why not just use wind or solar to run the capture equipment? Then you're not emitting anything. Well, in fact, you are emitting, because that's the best case. Let's say you use wind or solar. That means that the wind or solar cannot replace the coal plant. If you have wind or solar to run carbon capture equipment, why wouldn't you use that wind and solar just to replace the coal plant in the first place? 100%. So it turns out that you can eliminate more CO2 by using the exact same amount of wind or solar that would run the capture equipment just to replace a portion of the coal plant, and you'll reduce more CO2. So by not using that wind or solar to replace the coal plant, you're actually then increasing CO2 because you're using it for a lower carbon purpose. So and plus, if you use wind or solar to replace the coal plant, you eliminate the air pollution from the coal plant. Right. Whereas if you use carbon capture equipment, you just keep that air pollution from the coal plant. If you use wind and solar to replace the coal plant, you eliminate the mining of coal. If you use carbon capture, you maintain the mining of the coal.
Right.
And then if you use wind and solar and eliminate the coal plant, wind and solar are now cheaper than coal, and so you reduce your costs. If you use carbon capture, you not only have to pay for the wind and solar on top of the coal plant, but you have to pay for the capture equipment. So in this plant in Thompson, Texas, it costs $1 billion to add the gas plant and the carbon capture equipment to the coal plant. Who pays that $1 billion? Well, and by the way, this plant was shut after 3 years because it was
Oh,
so
wow.
useless. And all the CO2 that was captured was sent for enhanced oil recovery, by the way. So who pays over 3 years that $1 billion? Well, it's ratepayers, and who pays the highest fraction of their income for electricity? It's low-income ratepayers. So it's low-income ratepayers that are saddled with these huge bills for carbon capture equipment and the pipelines and the energy requirements for it. It's just a complete, ridiculous scam. I mean, it's a scam that pretending as if they're doing something.
Right. Yeah. So I heard it's justifying demand because you're expanding and therefore you need this demand. It's increasing mining. It's not actually getting all the emissions. Like the other thing I don't know if you like this analogy, but I've been saying, so you're having people increase smoking and you're just capturing the secondhand smoke, right? So I think that's a fair analogy. Yes.
Yeah, that's one way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah. And then to justify, so if you could expand a little bit on the gas piece, because, like I said, I'm a geophysicist and I feel like sometimes it's easy to lose the plot in the lies that are spread around. And so, for example, I remember talking about this natural gas transition. So, one of the things that's talked a lot about in Canada is LNG as a green energy solution. But so to me, when I think back on it now, as you're just describing, we have all of this leakage between, well, first of all, you have to actually drill the wells, and then you have a bunch of emissions that are associated with that. Then you have leakage from the wells themselves, you have leakage from the pipelines, you have leakage from the transport systems, and the only place where you're actually potentially capturing emissions is from the stack itself at those facilities, correct?
Yeah, well, when you have gas or coal or oil, you're mining, and especially gas, which has mostly methane, it's like 90% methane, and methane is like the third leading cause of global warming, but per unit mass, it's actually like on a 20-year time scale, it's like over 80 times the global warming impact of carbon dioxide. So there's the average methane, it's not only leaks, it's forced emissions. I mean, so the word leaks is kind of a misnomer. I mean, there are leaks, but they're also like gas companies will release methane intentionally or gas intentionally into the air, either through flaring or just releases to relieve pressure on the pipelines. Anyway, the average leakage rate across all types of gas mining is around 3.5%. And that it's up to some places up to 9-10%. Other places it might be 2%, but it's like on average it's around 3.5%. And that's a lot of methane that's coming out and never going to be captured. And like if you're using gas, for example, to run capture equipment by creating electricity or something, then you're going to be mining more gas. And so you're going to have more leaks and you're not capturing that. That just goes into the equation of why this is useless. It's not actually helping anything. And the CO2 that is captured, first of all, the industry claims, they get 95% capture rates of the CO2. And that just has never occurred anywhere in reality. The real life, in theory, with perfect conditions, you could get 95%. But all real projects across all capture types the range is 10 to 80% the capture rate. It's because sometimes the capture equipment is off, sometimes it's down, sometimes they can't move the CO2, so they don't actually capture anything for a while. And a lot of half of them are less than 50%. So you have like really low capture rates, first of all, not high capture rates, huge amounts of leaks upstream that are never accounted for, big energy penalty to run the capture equipment. But again, in the best case, you're using renewables so you don't even have these mining. In the best case of using renewables, you're preventing the renewables from replacing a coal or gas plant. And by doing that, you actually then increase CO2. So you're always increasing CO2. Carbon capture always increases CO2, no matter what they're capturing from the stack, because they're pretending as if the energy they're using couldn't be used better for something else.
Right.
And it's like when you just draw your boundaries very narrowly, you get one result that you then try to advertise, but that's not actually what's happening in reality. What's happening is now you can't use that wind or solar to replace a fossil fuel source. It's the same thing with direct air capture. When you're using clean renewable energy to power direct air capture, you're just creating a new demand for energy that would
Yeah.
otherwise not be there.
Okay.
And so now you're just making more demand on the grid, and then now you can't use that electricity, that renewable electricity, to replace a fossil source. You have to now support, you need some more, if you don't have, because there's a limited amount of renewables available, you just have to start burning more fossil fuels to replace the renewables that you're using for your capture equipment.
Right. Yeah, just quit smoking altogether, right?
Yeah.
So I'm going to go back to, like, you were talking about, it's called the primary energy fallacy, right? Where people assume that it's this, the amount of energy we're using today is the equivalent of what we need in the future versus what, if we switch to a renewable. So maybe if we can get into, let's say we killed this, we think this should be abandoned technology. So what should we be doing instead, Mark? Like, what does the renewable transition look like? You've talked about a 38% decrease in world demand based on a renewable transition. I don't know what that number means in the context of where we're at in this conversation, but if you could just expand on how we would reduce energy demand if we were to move in another way, please.
Yeah, well, yeah, we develop plans for states and countries and provinces to transition to 100% renewables across all energy sectors. So the idea is simple. You electrify as much as you can and provide the electricity with wind, water, solar, which is really kind of wind, solar, geothermal, and hydro. And the electrification process itself, you can eliminate about 38% of world energy demand, because like an electric vehicle uses like 1/4 the energy as a gasoline vehicle to go the same distance. But averaged over all energy sectors, that's about a 20% reduction of demand. Electric heat pumps use 75% less energy than combustion heating. And electric induction cooktops use 60% less energy than gas to do the same thing. So when you average across all energy sectors, that's another 14% reduction of demand. If you electrify industry, that's another 4% or so. So you're up to 38%. But then, well, actually, it's a little more than that. So, 38. But then there's another 11% of all energy worldwide is used just to mine, transport, and refine fossil fuels and uranium. And we don't need to do that if we have wind and solar and geothermal and hydro, because those are renewable resources where the wind comes right to the turbine, solar comes right to the panel, water comes right to the reservoir, geothermal gets replenished by heat from deep in the earth. And so we can eliminate another 11% of energy worldwide. And then we can, on top of that, we can get end-use energy efficiency improvements beyond business as usual, but, for a few more percent. So we can actually get a 54% or so reduction of world power demand just by electrifying and providing the electricity with wind, water, and solar. And that's without people changing their habits. And so under the fossil fuel paradigm, where they use carbon capture, well, you don't get any of that 54% reduction, because you keep burning fuels, inefficient fuels. You keep using gasoline. You keep using gas heating for buildings. You still burn coal and oil for industry. And you still mine, transport, and refine fossil fuels and uranium. And so you barely get any change of your energy, but you then increase your energy needs because you need to run the capture equipment. So you need 25% more energy than you did for electricity generation. And so your energy demand, in fact, goes up. It doesn't go down 54%, it actually goes up. So again, this is like the fossil fuel industry wants to trick you into thinking that they're doing something useful when they're just preventing you from doing something efficient. And this is really dangerous. And then you can really see the opportunity cost here, because then when you electrify, provide the electricity with wind, water, and solar, you are eliminating the air pollution deaths from the fossil fuels. And worldwide, there are about 7.5 million premature deaths from air pollution from fossil and bioenergy fuels. And we could eliminate like 90% of those deaths just by transitioning to clean renewable energy. And same thing with global warming agents. You can eliminate them just by electrifying, providing the electricity with clean renewable energy. Whereas you're hardly reducing CO2 with carbon capture. So when you compare those two scenarios, which we did in a paper recently, where you compare the scenarios of of electrifying, providing the electricity with wind, water, solar, versus not electrifying, but just using carbon capture or direct air capture, what you find is the social cost is about 9 to 12 times higher of going the carbon capture route than wind, water, and solar. A lot of that's due to the air pollution health cost. A lot of it's due to the higher carbon emissions from carbon capture, direct air capture, and the rest is due to the higher energy costs from carbon capture, direct air capture. So, on the order of a factor of 10 higher costs, and that's no matter how you slice it, you get a factor of 10 higher costs. So yeah, if you want to keep paying higher social costs, dying more, having more damage to the climate, having more damage to your environment, and paying higher bills, electricity, heat, everything bills, yeah, go for that carbon capture. It's just a scam. It's a greenwashing scam that does nothing but raise costs for everybody.
Yes. Thank you. That was great. So I heard, this is an increase of 9 to 12 times magnitude of harm essentially to people versus something that would half the harm by, more than half the harm that we're experiencing in terms of our pocketbooks, but also in terms of the impact in air quality and land degradation and water stability, let's say. The one thing I wanted you to expand on, if you don't mind, is when people make the argument of, oh, well, but then you're just mining a whole other industry to be able to justify this transition. That's the argument in the industry, is that there's this whole mining aspect for renewables and for the electrical transport system, let's say, which is just not attainable, et cetera. I've seen numbers that this system uses 5% of the material usage that the fossil fuel system does. Can you elaborate on that point, please?
Yeah, well, fossil fuels use orders of magnitude. You have to mine fossil fuels every day for eternity to keep using fossil fuels, because like in the case of wind, solar, etc., wind comes right to the turbine, solar comes right to the panel. So you eliminate fuel mining altogether. Whereas the main mining from fossil fuels is fuel mining, which is done every single day. And it's just orders of magnitude larger mining for fuel. Now, when you have renewables, yeah, you have to do some mining one time at the beginning, like for lithium for batteries, for example. But first of all, batteries, you put them in a car once, and that car is now, they're going 20, 25 years. And then they get recycled. The lithium, you can recycle 100% of the components, up to 100%. Let's say 97 to 100% of the components in a lithium battery can be recycled, and they are being recycled now, and they will be more in the future. So that same lithium can be reused in 20 years, 25 years for another car or for stationary battery storage. And whereas, meanwhile, that if you're going the fossil fuel route, you would be mining gasoline every day for those 25 years, plus the next 25 years, plus the next 25 years. So you have one-time mining versus continuous mining. So basically, over a 100-year period to drive, like if you converted all the vehicles in the world to lithium-ion vehicles, this includes passenger vehicles and trucks and buses, you're going to be mining 10,000 to 100,000 times less fuel over that 100-year period versus for mining fossil fuels for fossil fuel vehicles. And it's like a speck that you couldn't even see in a sea of dots because of how small the mining is compared to the mining you need for fossil fuels. In the US, we drill 50,000, well, actually in the Great Plains of both the US and Canada, we drill 50,000 new oil and gas wells every year. In the US, we have 1 million active oil and gas wells and 4 million abandoned ones. And the fossil fuel industry occupies about almost 1.2% of all US land. The ethanol industry for corn is another 1.24% of land. So we're close to 2.4% of US land is used just for energy with fossil fuels and ethanol. If you electrify everything, provide the electricity from clean renewable sources, we need on the order of 1% of US land. So we'd reduce land use if we go to the wind, water, solar route versus keeping with fossil fuels. And you have to keep growing that fossil fuel land every year because you need more fossil fuels. A lot of that land is not only for the mines, but for the pipelines. There's millions of miles of pipelines crossing the US for fossil fuels, and hundreds of thousands of gas stations. You need to keep growing the land needed for fossil fuels. Whereas with renewables, there's a little bit of growth, but it's much slower because it's really one-time mining and one-time infrastructure, and then it kind of slowly grows as population increases. So it's not a comparison. There's just, in terms of health benefits, in terms of climate benefits, in terms of cost benefits, in terms of reduced land use, and also in terms of jobs. Worldwide, we estimate over 25 million more long-term full-time jobs produced versus lost when we go wind, water, solar versus a fossil fuel economy.
That was fantastic, Mark. Yeah, thank you. It's so fascinating. Again, these stories all seem to weave together in terms of their, it's a lie to say that we need this CO or carbon capture and storage, let's say, to justify additional production. And you think of all the reduction in all of these areas. Like you said, I'm picturing all of these ships going, across the oceans daily to provide this constant source of fuel, versus you do a delivery of solar panels and wind turbines, and your ongoing shipping system is like it's. I've heard that the global supply chain system is changing rapidly right now because of this massive demand shift in material movement. Can you speak to that at all, or are you familiar with?
I can't really say much about it. I haven't looked into that issue too much.
Okay. Okay. So if you wouldn't mind just expanding a little bit on what does a renewable deployment look like? Like you mentioned you've been in countries and cities, and can you speak to, I'm in Calgary, Alberta, where there is, I would say I don't know what we are right now. I want to say we're 80% fossil fuel dependent or something like that in our electrical system. I think maybe it's not as bad as that anymore. I'm not sure, but what does a transition look like for, just in terms of renewable deployment? Like, how do you go about doing that work for
in Canada, it's pretty easy because you have so much land and so much resource. In the south of Canada, there's a bunch of solar, especially in the summer. In fact, there's a community, Drake Landing, that for a couple decades, there are homes where there's solar collectors that on the garages of homes that would take heat from the sun, store it underground in soil for up to 6 months. So because you have long summer days, and you can store that solar heat for up to 6 months, and then use that heat to provide 100% of home heating in the winter. That's a district heating system. So you can use sun not only for heat, but also electricity generation as well. But there's solar in the south, there's wind pretty much everywhere, but selected places. There's hydro in a lot of places in Canada. There's enhanced geothermal everywhere, which is a new commercial technology where you can just dig down into the earth. If you dig deep enough, you get high enough temperatures to heat water that then provides electricity, because you can use a turbine to generate electricity with high enough temperature heat when you evaporate a fluid. And so now you can do that anywhere. So yeah, you've got hydro, you've got geothermal, you've got wind, you've got solar, and you combine that with battery storage for electricity. You already have hydro storage in a lot of hydroelectric dams, and also then there's heat storage and there's cold storage, but you require electrification of buildings, electrification of transportation, electrification of industry. So that's what it looks like: electrifying, going to electric vehicles, going to electric homes, going to electric industry, providing the electricity from clean renewable sources, which there's plenty of in Canada. We've done a plan for Canada, and actually several plans for Canada, and they all are it's one of the easiest countries to transition from a technical and economic point of view.
Fascinating. Yeah. I was thinking about all of these oil and gas sites that are powered by a solar and battery system today, and thinking about how those could be redeployed, like you're saying. because those are generally mobile sites as well. So anyway, I'm sure there's a whole bunch of very easy things that could happen. In fact, I'm almost convinced that we have all the solar and battery technology we need, if not more, where I live, if we just looked to it and deployed it properly. Thank you so much for that. So I'd like to, if you don't mind, just explore a little bit with you because of my experience in site cleanup and closure. Like when you're talking about landmass, for example, you talked about how if we just reduced went away from both fossil fuel and ethanol types of energy use towards renewables, let's say a third of the land would be used. And I look at that as, an opportunity to potentially use some of these contaminated lands as another potential deployment of solar, and then be able to keep, because they would be tied into the electrical system already. So I guess what I'm saying is I see an opportunity to be doing renewable deployment in marriage with site cleanup and closure. And I look at as somebody as an industry professional would love to see, instead of drilling a well, we are abandoning wells. Instead of putting in a new pipeline, we're removing a pipeline. Instead of deploying new facilities, we're removing them, and et cetera, et cetera. Instead of mapping reservoirs, we'd be mapping contamination plumes. These are the types of activities I see in terms of jobs. When you talk about jobs and those opportunities in that, what, if any, work or thoughts do you have in that space, Mark, about trying to marry those two activities together in terms of reducing the footprint from fossil fuels while deploying renewables?
Yeah, there's a lot of places that we can put renewables that don't take up new useful land. I mean, so aside from just putting solar on rooftops, you don't need new land, or putting solar on agricultural fields where you can combine agriculture and solar in what's called agrivoltaics, where you space the solar out. You can put wind and solar on degraded land, contaminated land, and you can reduce even the land use of wind and solar by putting solar, combining it with wind at the same place. Because
Right.
wind, you don't take any land on the ground with wind. They're just a pole in the ground. But you do have what's called spacing area.
Right.
And people equate spacing area, well, you're just occupying all that land, where you're not. You're actually allowing farmers to grow their crops
Right.
underneath,
Yeah.
or there's still open space or grazing land or ranch land, or if you're offshore, there's no land at all. But you could combine solar and wind and battery storage at the same location, and then when you do that, you provide more stable power, because wind and solar are complementary in nature. When the wind's not blowing, the sun is off and shining during the day, and vice versa.
Right.
And by combining the two, you actually get smoother overall output, especially if you add batteries, then you can smoothen the output even more. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunities in taking like these degraded fossil fuel lands and turning them into renewable energy fields. And you can even add geothermal in there too, because that doesn't take up much land either.
Yeah.
If they especially if they want to keep drilling, just drill for geothermal, and that's better drilling.
It is, yeah, but I've seen that industry a little bit. I think there's, some potential in the regulations that would help make that industry more attractive. I think if anything, there's been some, handcuffing happening between that deployment versus drilling for new fossil fuels, and also for renewables. Our province did a whole, what's interesting to be considered almost like a removal of landowners' rights when it comes to renewable deployment, versus where they're forced to receive fossil fuel development on their lands. They can't pursue renewables. So it's pretty remarkable, despite the handcuffs, that this technology is finally making its way. That technology, I mean solar, wind, and batteries, and other renewable sources. Thank you so much for all of this, Mark. This has been tremendous. Is there anything in this conversation that you'd like to add? I'm just going to close with that, thank you for reminding folks why carbon capture and storage is not a legitimate solution. It actually increases emissions. It doesn't address the primary problem, which is methane emissions. And it is justifying a growing energy demand world in a situation where there is an opportunity to halve it, and also provide some social and environmental justice along the way. So anything else you'd like to add that I missed in this?
No, I just suggest we keep our eye on the ball and focus on what works and ignore these greenwashing claims about carbon capture, direct air capture, also blue hydrogen, electrofuels. These are all constructs of the fossil fuel industry. We just want
That's
to
right.
focus on clean, renewable energy, electrification. That's what works. We don't have much time. Let's just do that, and we will solve these problems together.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's because of people like you that I'm aware and working on this with you. So thank you for spending some time with me this afternoon, Mark.
Yeah, happy to.
Thank you. Take care for now.
Thanks.